have to invest in training and awareness. No insider threat program can get far without training and awareness and making that cultural shift. So until you get the basics right, no tool on earth is going to help you, no matter how fancy or expensive.
Welcome to Reinvent Security, the podcast where we look at ways of doing information security that actually works. And we do that respectfully by calling out those practices proven not to be fit for purpose. I am Irfan Santu, an information security executive, OWASP chapter leader, book author, public speaker on information security, and I'm extremely passionate about solving the multifaceted information security problem. I'm here today with my dear friend and co-host of the podcast, Jeroen Prinsen.
Thank you, Irfan. My name is Jeroen Prinsen. I'm a freelance Chief Information Security Officer. I'm a public speaker, a trainer and coach and co-host of this podcast. I have nearly 2 decades of experience in the field of information security, and I'm here today with you.
In today's episode, we're really going to take an inside-out view, right? The episode is about insider threat, and we are so happy to have a true leader in the area, our guest. Welcome, Sunette Runhaar. It's an absolute pleasure having you here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
You started as a head of, you currently are the head of Uber's Global Insider Threat Program. Before joining Uber, you were at Tesla, where you built up the company's first information security education and awareness program from ground up. Your career started in your home country of South Africa, working for SRM, a risk consultancy firm, where you led a team of investigative analysts. You help companies reduce human-driven risk and get employees excited about security, which is already a very tough thing to do. So let's start with that. In your own words, share with us your journey into the field of information security, with a focus on an insider threat. That's fine. It doesn't have to be that.
Sure. Well, I never actually planned on a career in information security. I'm actually trained as a biochemist.
Oh, wow.
So when I was finishing my master's degree, I loved the problem-solving aspect of a degree in the sciences. I loved putting the puzzle pieces together and seeing the solution at the end. But when I finished my master's, I realized I didn't really think that a sort of life in a traditional lab setting was for me. So I did something that's quite common in South Africa. If you have a STEM degree and you don't necessarily want to go into your field, you go into consulting. So I joined, my first job was as a due diligence and investigative analyst for a risk consultancy, British headquartered, but it just opened up in Cape Town. So with the work that I was doing, so much of it relied on getting into the mindset of the person you were investigating. A lot of our clients often needed us to help them find things that people were trying to hide. And sometimes that was reputational issues. Sometimes that was money. Sometimes that was legal problems. We were kind of tasked with trying to identify stuff. So everything was open source. But you kind of had to take a look at what you had in front of you and go, well, what do I know about this person? And based on what I know, if I was in their shoes, how would I go about hiding this or kind of covering my tracks or, showing one picture when the reality is quite different? And a lot of our cases were cracked on that basis. When I joined Tesla, when I moved to the Netherlands, I was hired again as an investigative analyst, but now I was supporting internal investigations. So now I didn't just have access to open source information. I now had an employee's whole history. I had all the accesses that they were given, what privileges they didn't have, a history of any issues or concerns. So I had more puzzle pieces to play with, so to speak, and really build a whole understanding of what was motivating someone's behavior. And this was all before I even had heard of the concept of insider threat.
Oh,
so
seriously?
in a way, I was doing insider threat before I even knew it was insider threat.
Yeah.
And during my time at Tesla, I'd been there for a few months, and through my investigations, I sort of raised the fact that we keep seeing the same problems over and over and over again. And when we chase it down and spend a whole lot of time investigating, we realize it was just someone doing their job, but they were kind of taking a shortcut or trying to get it done quickly. And it looked suspicious, but it was totally innocent. And I suggested, well, maybe we can reduce negligent behavior if we stand up a full awareness and education program for information security. And Tesla being Tesla, I was told, great, that's your full-time job now, run with it. And it was great. It allowed me to really get to the other side of insider threat, which I'm now quite passionate about, which is how much of a role your workforce plays in the success or failure of your program. Because through that program, we actually had a real cultural shift in the company, and we started to see like people reporting things to us, people really engaging with security, people getting excited to hear from us, but crucially them telling us about things that we didn't even know was going on. So they really played such a critical role to the program before we'd even anticipated what a role the workforce could play being on our side with the Insider Threat program. So by the time I arrived at Uber, I felt like I'd really seen a whole lot of different sides of insider threats. I'd been part of investigations. I'd worked with a team that did monitoring and detection. I'd literally been elbows deep in training and awareness and getting kind of that cultural shift going with your security awareness. So it's been really interesting journey from a biochemist to Uber.
Excellent, excellent. I mean, I think it's always enriching if we have people in the field of information security in general, coming from different backgrounds. I really love hearing that, by the way. I think it strengthens our own industry as well.
It really does. Some of the strongest teams I've ever worked in have come from diverse
backgrounds.
And it just gives you such different perspectives on the same problem. And then you go, I didn't think about it that way at all. But that's a very interesting approach. Let's explore that.
Exactly. So what we will do, because this is the Reinvent podcast, Sunette. So we're gonna ask you to share those moments with us, either in your personal life or professional life, hopefully both. That supported reinventing yourself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with professional, I think definitely that moment right from the beginning going, well, I've spent years training for a career in the sciences. No, thanks. I think I'm going to go for something else. I actually remember the exact moment where I was asking myself, well, you have a scientific mindset, you have this training, you have the ability to look at problems from a unique perspective. How can you put that to good use in a different career or a different path going forward? From a personal perspective, I think that would probably be sort of my fitness and my commitment to that. I do CrossFit and I absolutely love it. But only a couple of years ago, I started taking running quite seriously. And when I started, I hated it. I hated it. I would run 2 kilometers and be like, no, like, I don't want to do this anymore. I have to stop. And it wasn't physical. It was entirely mental. It was just like, I hate this. I find it boring. I don't want to do it. And I didn't. But then COVID happened and everything closed. And my options were sit on my couch for who knows how long and sort of, be miserable, or there's the whole outside available to me. So it started with, run 2Ks and don't stop.
Oh, wow.
Run 3Ks and don't stop. Run 5Ks and don't stop. And before I knew it, I loved it so much.
Wow.
And it built so much of my mental endurance as well, which is something that I apply in my work too. So 2 years ago, I ran my first half marathon. This year I'm running a mountain trail race with a friend in Finland. So we're on the up. But that was quite transformative for me, something that I hated with a passion, and now I really look forward to it. It's a big part of what shaped me.
So so was it COVID situation that transformed?
Sorry, it was the COVID situation, not me personally.
I'm just trying to understand what is the trigger action.
I was not running when I had COVID, believe me. No, it was the fact that everything was closed. But we were lucky in the Netherlands, at least, that we could still go outside. We were encouraged to go outside. So I was like, well, the whole park is right there. There's nothing stopping you from taking advantage of that, even if you can't go to a physical gym. So I was like, well, am I going to sit around, or am I going to do something about this?
We are all professionals. We all are, very busy with our jobs, and having activities, whether it's running or something else that can balance you out a little bit. I mean, that's a sustainable security professional, I would say, to have, and which all of us are really looking for. So thank you for sharing that with our listeners, I would say. So in your own words, can you explain to our listeners the insider threat and the risk it poses to organizations? How real is it, Sunette?
Sure, of course. So I'll kind of break it down right from the beginning for anyone who's not familiar with this concept. And it isn't really still quite a widespread concept outside of the USA. So I'll kind of give you the working definition that we use, which is, firstly, when we talk about an insider, it's anyone who has or even had completely legitimate and authorized access to an organization's assets. And when we talk about assets, we default sort of think of data because data is really the currency in which we all deal these days, and it is very valuable. But it goes even further. It's the fact that you are giving people access to your physical spaces, the fact that you can walk around an office building, you can overhear conversations, you can see screens, you can pick up a piece of paper, and your access to people. I can walk up to any of my colleagues and ask them a question about the work that they're doing, and I am trusted and privileged enough for them to probably give me a very detailed answer back. And there's a lot of value and power in having access to that information without question. So those are sort of the assets that we refer to that, your insiders are given access to for their job. So when someone becomes an insider threat, it's the risk that they will use that privileged and legitimate access to harm the company. Now, classically, we think of malicious insider threats when we think about this. You think about the person who's angry or frustrated, or they've been offered a lot of money or some kind of benefit or advantage, and they are now going to steal information, sabotage the company, harm their colleagues, etc., for that purpose. But basically, they know what they're doing, and they're doing it quite deliberately. You don't often hear people talking about the other face of insider threat, which is your negligent insiders. That's someone who doesn't mean to harm the company, but they're doing it because they're in a rush, they're not paying attention, they're taking a shortcut. Really simple example here, someone is not paying attention, they get an email, they don't really take the time to question it or read through it properly. It's a phish. They click on it, boom, there's malware on the company. In terms of the risk, if you are employing people in your organization, you have the potential risk of an insider threat. Because of negligent insider threats, we all make mistakes from time to time. We're all in a rush, we're all distracted, we're all not paying attention, we're all trying to get our job done as quickly as possible.
True that.
You're always going to run the risk of negligent insider threats, whether it's a phishing email, whether it's even someone telling a friend about the work that they're doing that they really shouldn't be talking about outside of the company because of its confidentiality. Malicious insiders, they're trickier. And it honestly can boil down to your company's culture. It can boil down to the particular experience that someone is having with their manager or colleagues. It can even be completely out of your control. We often talk about the critical pathway for insider threats. It can start off with something as simple as personal problems at home. The home life is stressful. They're experiencing financial difficulties. A loved one is sick, and it's adding to their pressure of work-life balance. And that stress starts to make people do things that they wouldn't normally do in happier or healthier circumstances. So you can't always control for malicious insider threats, even within your own organization, which makes the risk so much harder to nail down. But it doesn't mean that it goes away just because you can't see it happening in front of you.
Yeah. So you're saying preventing is not the option. Like you cannot prevent it. Yeah. You're trying to work on it and make it not happen or occur that insider threat. But it is not always in your control. So prevention alone will not be enough, sufficient.
You will never, just like I think every security professional will agree with this. Yeah. You can never have 100% secure company. But with insider threat, it goes a step further. Because I think what we fundamentally sometimes forget, particularly in information or cybersecurity, is that every data point you have, every single thing you see when you are monitoring or detecting or working on things, it's not just a data point, that's a human being. And that's a human being's action. And we all know that we're complicated creatures. We are driven by emotion, and our opinions can change on the turn of a dime based on something someone said or our mood that morning or things going on.
I had it this morning with Jeroen, so I know what we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Things can change so quickly, and what might seem rational to one person is completely irrational to another one. And that's what makes insider threat both so complicated and so interesting. We're talking about people, and people are unpredictable, and people are driven by things that you don't necessarily understand or make total sense. So you can never 100% prevent it, but there's a lot that you can do to try and control for it as much as it is within your control, to both prevent and respond to it efficiently.
Yeah, to me, it's like prevent, for example, by not giving all the privileges in the world. I mean, that makes sense, right? Especially around the detection. I think that also has a lot of interesting angles to it, especially in the Netherlands, due to like stricter privacy laws. Like in the US, it's a little bit easier, I think. Yeah. But detecting malicious actors. I kind of find that curious how we could do that in the EU/Dutch setting, and then responding to it. I think that it's the thing that gets breached in security over and over again, right? So protect, detect, and respond. But I'm quite curious how that relates to this subject.
So to conclude, so for the scope of insider threat, what you're saying to our listeners, Sunette, is you have the malicious intent, right?
Yeah.
And you have the negligible.
Negligent,
negligent.
Unintentional, whatever
Unintentional.
you want to call it. Someone who basically wasn't paying attention.
Yeah,
at
exactly.
that moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. So maybe we can go into one level deeper, right? So if we look at, that's the understanding of what we know as insider threat. How has the insider threat landscape evolved over the years? And maybe you want to make distinctions over regions, right? Because I do know that in the US, this has been getting more attention over the last years compared to Europe. So maybe this is also bounded regionally. So I'll leave it over you to answer that question.
Well, it's actually a really interesting history because there's a reason why it's quite well known now in the US, and you'll find many large US companies have dedicated insider threat programs in-house, but it's still quite unknown outside of the US. In particular in Europe, you will not find a lot of companies that have these kinds of programs or even really considering it as a specific thing to pursue.
Yep.
And there's a reason for that. So if we want to talk about sort of the history of insider threat, it actually really started in the US intelligence community.
Okay.
And it was driven largely by the Cold War. This is obviously a time of heightened espionage activity between, the former USSR and the USA. So in the 1980s, a whole bunch of U.S. intelligence and investigative agencies got together. They'd caught quite a few spies at that point who'd been very, very successful at what they'd done, and had, in some cases, gone undetected for years until they maybe made a mistake or slipped up. So these groups got together and interviewed people who'd been caught and charged with espionage and asked them, well, how did you do it? How did you evade detection for as long as you did? How were you so successful at integrating and fooling everyone? And unsurprisingly, most of their techniques revolved around exploiting what I'll call basic human weaknesses. So the fear of wanting to be close to someone, showing off, ego, greed, all of these things that make us human but are vulnerabilities that can be exploited. So they would often form close personal relationships with people who did have access to information, including romantic relationships, in some cases even marriages for years. Or they would get themselves into a position at a company where they could have physical access to files. This is obviously before, personal computers were everywhere. You were probably targeting either recording conversations or having access to a file room. You needed to get into those spaces. So they would pose as employees who were trusted enough to be given the access that they wanted, whether it was to spaces or people, but not so interesting that you stuck out or were first on the list of suspicious people when something maybe did go wrong and people were sort of questioning around, what happened. So this was really the birthplace of insider threat. And the term really first started being employed by the FBI. And over the years, it sort of bled into the corporate space, particularly as people left government and intelligence positions and maybe entered the private sector. And so it has now waved its way across the Atlantic and spread further. So this is obviously intelligence on a nation state level. And, we think, well, we're a very far world away from spies and, government secrets. But the game hasn't changed that much. So obviously when we're talking about companies, it is a different ballgame. Firstly, we're in the modern era. Data is everywhere and it's much, much easier to access and move. But companies are fundamentally different to obviously a government.
The government, yeah.
When you are employing someone to do a job at your company, you have to trust them. You have to give them a certain amount of access to a certain amount of information because they need it literally to do their job. But we tend to be a little bit more free with what we give. Some companies are much stricter, of course, maybe depending on their industry or internal culture. But the majority, you give them the access they need, but you give them a little more. Or maybe they need access to something for a set period of time, but you forget to take that access away later because, they're a trusted employee. It doesn't matter. Also, obviously, you can't slow down information sharing between colleagues or even outside the company too much, or you're going to slow down your own business's operations and growth. So it is a different ballgame, obviously, compared to government level espionage. But ultimately, the tricks are actually the same. If I was an insider threat wanting to act in a malicious capacity, I would see who I could get close to or do what I could needed to do to access the information I needed and to get it out without detection. We have now at our disposal as well so many tools. We have so many tools to monitor everyone's every click, every bit of access that they give, everything that they do. We can see everything that someone is doing at any
There's
given
so much
time.
more context out there.
Exactly. So we have an advantage in that sense, in that we have a way more insight than ever before. But, fundamentally, the tricks are still the same. Like we were talking about human beings who are trusting each other. And if they really wanted to get access to this information, they could. And this is why dedicated insider threat programs have started to grow and evolve, because the problem, as long as you have people, the problem is there. And people will always be trusting, will always want to be helpful, particularly in a company versus a government. If I came up to someone in a government setting and said, hey, tell me about this interesting, top secret project.
By nature, they would be
you would
skeptical about it.
I can't talk about that. It's classified. Whereas if I went up to you, at work and said, hey, I saw you've gotten, allocated to this super interesting project, with that manager. Like, oh, tell me about it. You might go, oh, well, I can't talk about it that much, but, and we trust each other more. So it's actually so much easier to get access to information. And there's so many more ways that you could remove it if you really, really wanted to.
Excellent. And any final notes before we go to the next question, Sunette? Any final notes on why insider threat, if you compare US and Europe, we see that difference? I am actually personally very curious about that.
Yes.
People are more willing to move around, I think, in the USA. There's a lot more culture of job hopping. There's also a lot less expectation of loyalty, I think, in the US, just as a fundamental part of their working culture there. You as an employer are not necessarily expecting an employee to stick around forever, and you as an employee are equally constantly looking out for new and better opportunities and advantages. So there is a modern expectation that people will leave, and probably will leave after 2 years. Now, obviously, people are going to take institutional knowledge with them. There's nothing you can do about that. But they will also probably try and take some information with them, whether intentionally or not, that they shouldn't be taking with them. So if people are coming and going as frequently as they do in US working culture, you have to do something about that. Whereas in Europe, and I do admit that this is not always the case, but it is been my observation that this tends to be the case. People stick around for longer. There are obviously stronger labor laws here. You can't just get rid of somebody. People are also going to be a bit more hesitant to leave and might stick around for years rather than job hopping every 1 to 2 years. There's a lot more trust that, comes with being an employee for multiple years versus someone who's kind of in and out the door quickly. It is a bit of a different ball game here. And I have noticed that when I've spoken about this topic, where people are like, but we don't want to monitor everyone. We want to trust our employees. And I'm saying trust is a fundamental part of an insider threat program. You shouldn't assume that everyone is a risk and, has a target on their back at any moment. It's about how you approach it and tailor it to your own company culture. But if I had to guess, I would say that I think that culture of moving around a lot and a lot less expectation of loyalty and trust between employee and employer plays a huge role in why insider threat programs are more prolific in the US. But that history of it coming from intelligence agencies as well, it's just less of a foreign concept there. Whereas here, it's still sort of seen as, but you're going to track my every movement. We can do that in the US. We can't do that here. And it's like, I think there's a lot of misconception flying around too about what insider threat programs are versus what they really do.
Yeah, of course. And I think the more risk will arise and surface up of actually materializing, probably in Europe, we're going to take that more seriously as well, right? Yeah. That's how it works.
Yeah, I also think it's strange, right? Because we as security professionals often have like the principle assume breach.
Yeah. Zero trust.
Yeah. Zero trust, assume breach. Yeah. But assume breach is a key principle in our field, but we don't seem to apply it to the people that we work for.
Yeah.
And I get it, right? So when you work for companies, a lot of the times the conversation comes up saying, we can't monitor them. It's against the law, especially in the Netherlands. I think that also triggers people to say, well, okay, then I'm just gonna trust them and see what happens, right?
Yeah.
It's really, it's weird to me. I would assume
there's like a disconnect. Why are
there's
we
a
not
disconnect.
And that's why I think it's so valuable to have that conversation, Jeroen, so we can spread more awareness. So there are many capabilities needed, right, to mitigate the insider threat. If you're going to set up such a program within your organization, can you share with our audience, with our listeners, preferably in sort of order of importance, the different capabilities organization can go about implementing such a program or controls on that level?
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, to the point that we just discussed earlier, there is quite a misconception around insider threat programs. And I think a lot of that misconception, as you say, comes from the monitoring aspect of many insider threat programs. And it's a further misconception as well, even sometimes to people who, work or try to build insider threat programs. There's this feeling of, monitoring is the fundamental part of an insider threat program, and thus you need tools. You need these very, very expensive UEBA tools in order to monitor your employees, to determine baselines. And basically, if you can't have that and an army of people to triage the alerts, you can't have an insider threat program. And to me, that is a huge misconception and is driving, I think, a lot of reluctance for companies to build their own in-house programs. Because from my observation, you cannot go straight to the tool. You have to get your basics right first. And this goes back actually to the conversation about the negligent versus the malicious. So when I speak about this topic to groups, I usually show a picture from the children's book Where's Wally?
Yeah.
And the game is always to how do you spot Wally in a crowd that's very busy and lots of things are going on. And you look long enough, oh, there's Wally. Sometimes you find him in a second. Sometimes it takes you a couple of minutes. And I usually show a picture where it's just a sea of Wallys. And the real Wally is there somewhere hiding among everyone who looks exactly the same and who's doing exactly the same thing. And you go, how on earth am I supposed to find the real Wally, the malicious insider, so to speak, if everyone looks and acts exactly the same? And it is pretty much the same situation in a company. If you have not invested in good security culture, you're not training your employees, you're not enforcing proper security practices and procedures, if you have given them 1,000 avenues through which they can move, store, and exfiltrate data, and you're not monitoring, you're not blocking anything, you're just letting them do what they want, then someone sending their payslip to their personal email is going to look just as bad as somebody who is exfiltrating confidential files also to their personal email address. And you can't necessarily tell the difference. So the first thing you actually have to do is get your basics right.
Yeah.
You have to block off exfiltration pathways. You have to really sit down with your business and your leaders and say, what is our risk landscape? What is our appetite? Are we happy with opening certain vulnerabilities if it means that the business can sort of move faster? Or are we taking a much more low-risk approach and we'd rather have things slow down if it means that our data is more secure? You have to have that conversation because if you're trying to build, Fort Knox from security perspective and the business goes, whoa, we can't even communicate with our vendors, you have a problem and you have a mismatch.
Yeah.
You have to understand your risk landscape. You have to determine your culture, and you have to invest in training and awareness. No insider threat program can get far without training and awareness and making that cultural shift. So until you get the basics right, no tool on earth is going to help you, no matter how fancy or expensive.
So that's we have an advantage in that, right? Because some of these controls that you're describing are already there, needed from an information security perspective, right? Which has different attack factors and attackers, I would say.
Like data
So you are not alone. I would say people that are driving insider threat programs are not alone. They can tag along into.
Yeah.
So how do you see that collaboration happening? And what are your tips and tricks on making sure that we get as much as possible synergies out and I would say endorse each other as well in the journey of mitigating risk, whether it's insider threats or actually attackers from the outside, hackers from the outside.
So honestly, they work together in harmony because I have seen situations too where external actors have leveraged internal actors, either sometimes wittingly or unwittingly, to then become insider threats who are ultimately serving an external actor.
Yes,
That
yes,
happens
yes.
too, believe me. So they have to work together.
Yeah.
If you have a very good insider threat program, actually what it will do when it's at its best is bring together different elements and different teams and have the more holistic view that enables people to work together better. So insider threat, this is obviously, this podcast is more focused on information security,
Yeah.
but insider threat is a human problem.
It is.
And people are not limited to their computers. So when you talk about insider threat, you are talking about a three-dimensional human being that poses risks from an information security perspective, a physical security perspective,
yeah.
a legal problem,
Yeah.
a compliance
Yeah,
issue,
yeah,
an HR problem, and a whole host of other things besides. So the job of a good insider threat program is to actually look at the landscape as a whole and go, if we're talking about people and the vulnerabilities that they either present or exploit, where do those vulnerabilities sit? And how does this affect different teams at different times in different stages of the employee lifecycle? So a good insider threat program will actually bring everyone to the table and say, hey, we have noticed this problem. Let's say the problem is employees are taking data with them when they leave the company, sometimes intentionally, sometimes without realizing it's a problem. How are we together collectively going to solve this? Legal team, you're going to write a policy about this. Physical security team, you're going to ensure that laptops and badges are returned, promptly at this time on the day of someone's departure. Cybersecurity team, you're going to disable network access and send people notifications. HR, you're going to build a checklist for managers. And then it becomes a process that everyone is working together on and pointing out issues or faults and working together to solve them, instead of each team working in little silos and then going, oh, shoot, we're also working on the same thing. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, well, we've done our bit. We guess it sort of fits together. So a good insider threat program will actually bring everyone together.
All together, yeah.
And facilitate a bigger conversation about, this is a bigger process that affects people, not just legal or cybersecurity or HR or whatever. This is a bigger problem that we have to address together to make a process that is then ingrained in the company's culture and way of doing things.
Excellent.
So do you see an insider threat program as something separate from a security program, or is that insider threat program part of your security program as a company?
I've seen it actually posited in a whole bunch of different places. I've seen insider threat programs within risk and compliance.
Yeah.
I've seen it within legal. I've seen it reporting directly to the CEO even. Traditionally, they will sit in information security programs. And again, it kind of depends on your own company's way of working and maybe how your departments and verticals are set up internally. But the nature of insider threat at some point or other is going to lend itself a little bit more towards information security, largely because that is where our crown jewels tend to sit in our data and in our networks. So I have personally seen the most success coming out of insider threat programs that are sitting within information security and are a fundamental part of how that security department operates. But I have also seen successful programs in other departments. Yeah. It kind of does boil down to your own company's setup. But regardless of where your program sits, the key to a successful insider threat program is stakeholder engagement and management. Right. You will never be successful if you're operating in a silo, sitting in the shadows, the secret squirrels doing things and not telling anyone about it. Then you're just another program operating in a silo.
I mean, that's also the trait for information security. I would even argue any risk sort of function you're trying to set up and drive, working with stakeholders is so important because you cannot do it alone. You need the other departments to actually execute on the processes.
Exactly. Yes. That's the thing. You can't, you can come in and kick doors down and say, you will do this because this is a risk. And, here we have the matrix and we've said so. But I mean, maybe people will do it, but they'll hate you for it. And then they're not going to want to play nice next time, you need something done. So, I mean, every department always thinks their own problems are the biggest problems.
Of course.
So the key for, you as an insider threat program is to come in and say, we have the same problems and we're actually here to help you and figure out a way that we can all do this together and share the burden and ultimately make this solution sustainable in the long term,
Yeah.
not just until the next person leaves and then the whole process starts all over again,
Exactly.
you know?
So let's assume now that with our listeners we have. I'm quite confident that we have, sparked the awareness that this is important to look at. Now let's assume that whatever department head within an organization is thinking about, okay, we need to set up such an insider threat program, or even hire people that can do this for us. Like, what can they look for when hiring an insider threat professional expert leader, I would say?
Biochemist.
Empathy.
Empathy.
And
I like that.
And I say that because, again, this is a human problem. We're talking about human beings, and the fact that they are messy and complicated and will feel emotions depending on what's going on with them in the day. You cannot understand the mindset of somebody who is acting in a malicious way if you cannot empathize with them, and if you cannot see what may have led them down that path, what may have triggered them to make a decision that, you know, if you talk to their manager or their colleagues, they're like, no, Steve would never do that. You know, he loves his job. He's been so happy here. Now that you mention it, actually, you know, he's been, you know, having some trouble with his manager and that hasn't been going very well, but no, he'd still never do it. You have to get into that mindset.
Yeah.
And the most, honestly, the best and most successful practitioners in this industry that I've ever seen are genuinely caring and empathetic people who really do understand and see, like, they can put themselves in the shoes of those people.
Of the insiders.
Yeah. And it's a very fundamental part as well with stakeholder management. But when you're talking through incident response, for example, let's say a whole bunch of people have been laid off unceremoniously. We are so busy thinking about the risk that those people who've been laid off are posing to the company and locking down their access and making sure we've taken away their laptops and, you know, checking that they haven't taken anything out the door with them. We forget about the ones that have been left behind. There is a genuine thing, and I've seen it with my own eyes, called survivor's guilt, where people, even though they weren't part of maybe the layoff, they feel guilty and then subsequently angry about what has happened to their colleagues, particularly if the layoff was handled in quite a emotionless and maybe seen as uncaring or inconsiderate, or, you know, we're just disposable and replaceable to them.
Yeah.
You then get insider threats developing from the pool of remaining people because now they're angry, they've been disillusioned, and they're sitting there and thinking, how could you do this to them? And when is it our turn? When is my name going to come up on the chopping block? And that aftercare, I mean, this is a tricky situation. It's never going to be 100% right. But the fact that a lot of security programs will deem, you know, we're drawing the line, the people are out the door, it is done, we now move on with our other things. And don't stop and think about the people left behind and how are we going to manage them? How are we going to have conversations with them? Honestly, will we have to monitor them for a period to make sure that nothing's going to go wrong, you know, months after the other people have left? That requires empathy. That requires sitting and thinking, well, honestly, if this happened to me, I'd be angry. That is one example. But empathy in an insider threat program leader is really key.
Crucial.
To building trusted relationships and to looking at your workforce pool as not just numbers in a machine, but as human beings who will have feelings based on what you do and say to them.
Oh, excellent. Thank you so much, Sunette. We're going to go into more like the closing section of the time flies, by the way. We're going to go into the closing section of the podcast. So we're going to look at future trends and predictions. And everybody's talking about it. And you know, I'm very curious on your views. What role AI will play in the whole idea of insider threat, but also dealing with insider threat?
Of course. So there's two kind of sides to AI, which it offers a lot of risks, but also a huge amount of opportunities for us. From the risk perspective, you know, we've already seen, I actually went to a talk about this last week that just, like, you know, gave me nightmares probably for the rest of my career. But the way AI is now being leveraged for external attackers to try and leverage internals in their favor. And honestly, it's good old-fashioned social engineering, but we're talking about way more sophisticated phishing attempts. We're talking about way more sophisticated vishing and deepfakes. AI-generated stuff that, you know, can make someone look and sound like just about anyone you want. And again, leveraging negligent insiders who are not questioning or not paying attention and may be fooled. So, same trick, new technology,
Yes.
but it can be leveraged, honestly.
It's reaching scale to do what you
Precisely.
were doing in the past.
And in a way that would make, honestly, even a conscious security professional go, oh, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Is this real?
That's true.
Is this
That's
not
true.
real?
Yeah, we see that, by the way.
And of course, we've already seen this happening, but, AI usage, especially for like your chatbot platforms like OpenAI, or ChatGPT, sorry, they're just feeding information into it, and it's now seen as a tool that its use is totally widespread and totally fine. Again, people who aren't aware will just happily feed maybe confidential information into it and not really stop and think about whether they should be doing that. But these are risks that have been covered quite broadly, so I don't think that's anything new. In terms of opportunities to the Insider Threat Program, AI can be completely transformative to an organization's Insider Threat Program that is perhaps a little bit more mature, but maybe you don't have the money to kind of hire more people, but you want to leverage what you have already. AI can assist, for example, in predictive modeling. When you want to take your program to the next level and you're like, okay, we've segmented our workforce, we've got the basics right, our monitoring and detections are at a good level, but now we want to take it further. Now we want to start getting predictive. We want to start looking as far forward as possible, like, do these behaviors that we're seeing now that, aren't really that problematic, could they mean something in 2 months' time, in 6 months' time, in a year's time? Does someone's risk profile change based on their life cycle or based on events within the company, like a layoff, like not getting promoted at a particular performance review cycle? Does that make the risk go up or down? And can AI help us to predict that? Can it also help us to identify and track risky persona markers? So at an advanced stage in your Insider Threat Program, you kind of want to be stopping the problems before they even walk in your door, or at the very least, keep an eye on them if they have managed to get in your door. You can, as a team and a business, decide on what you consider risky personas, people who are maybe quick to anger, people who are quite egotistical in the sense that, they think they're very important and, they're untouchable if they do something that they shouldn't be doing. AI can help you to model these types of behaviors and personas and actually help you to track them and predict them going forward. Looking at an even broader organization level, we talk about organizational health. How is your company doing, not just within your team, but actually across the spectrum? Are some departments going through layoffs or have reduced budget? Are other departments going through a tough time right now, literally because of the economic conditions? Are some teams having to, work insane hours right now? How does what is happening to one team in Sydney affecting a completely different
team? So you can model all that. You can model.
Well, you can track your organizational health and see how this might have impact to unrelated teams that might start to actually feel the pressure in ways that we as people might only be able to see if we're physically on the ground, but you're not necessarily. So AI can actually help you track that and keep an eye on hotspots within certain, like micro segmentation, we call it, where you've really reduced your workforce population down to very, very small slices. And you can take a much closer look at each slice and go, interesting, these guys were just affected by a poor performance cycle, but why is it impacting this team that's in a different continent? Oh, interesting, they have dependencies on each other that we were unaware of, so that what's happening to the one is starting to affect the other. AI can help you see these things that you might only experience if you were physically in the same office with that person.
I would say exciting.
Yeah.
So the question comes to mind, sorry to spin off this, where would I start? So we're talking about AI and risky persona markers, etc. To me, that sounds like, okay, I'll get there in 3 years if I start today, right? But where do I start?
Right now, you start with the basics.
And the basics are?
What we talked about earlier, like blocking off your stuff. So what I was referring to,
like blocking USB ports.
What I was referring to with AI stuff, that is literally
the
when you have a
state.
10-year vision. So we did a benchmarking session not too long ago with a different company, and their insider threat team has been in existence for 12 years.
Wow.
Their team is huge, I will grant it. Clearly, a lot of resources have been pumped into, and this has been prioritized.
Yeah.
But they didn't have the money nor did it fit actually their particular business setup to buy an off-the-shelf UEBA or any of those tools. And you do, by the way, get vendors that will offer these types of solutions for you. So they do exist. But they didn't have the money or the setup to buy something off the shelf. So they built their own. Slowly but surely over 10 years.
You have to have that vision.
In-house data scientists, in-house engineers, in-house machine learning experts. They showcased to us what they have. I was blown away.
Wow.
They are at what I was talking about. They're there.
The predictive analytics.
That was 12 years in the making, starting with a team of 2. So it takes, everyone can get there, but it takes vision and it takes commitment from leadership, because they admitted honestly, we started off tiny with no resources and nothing really to work on. And leadership has believed in us and invested us and been with us when we had a vision for where we would be in 10 years.
Wow.
And 10 years have gone, and now we are here. So it takes commitment, but everyone can get there with commitment and resourcing.
But start with the basics.
Start with the basics.
Start with the basics.
Crawl before you can run. Run before you can run marathons.
Yeah. Talking about the future, describe your ideal company mitigating the insider threat. Whether it's the culture part or the company as a whole, just try to describe it for us.
Oh, goodness. Definitely one that has prioritized security. So, security awareness and good practices is top of mind. It is modeled and, exemplified from the highest of the high ups all the way down to, the most entry level employee. People are aware, they're reminding each other of good practices, and they are reporting anything, no matter how big or small, to your security team, because they're like, that was a bit weird. I don't think it's necessarily a problem, but I thought I'd let you know just in case. Yeah. That's on the security side. And on the kind of general company culture side, a company that genuinely displays empathy and respect with its employees, because it has been my experience that when people feel seen and heard and respected, they tend not to want to steal stuff. So honestly, investing in your employees, and easier said than done, right? Like we're all subject to the macroeconomic headwinds. Sometimes you have to make hard decisions, but you don't have to be heartless when you make those hard decisions. And a company that can be empathetic in a time when I think fear and greed tend to dominate a lot of decision making. If you can get that right, even if that sphere of control is only you as a manager, maybe within your little team, honestly, you are saving yourself a lot of problems in the future.
Wow. Okay. Thank you so much for the insights, Sunette. So what we normally do, we ask all our guests to provide us with a list of readings. So if somebody wants to dive deeper into the insider threat as a capability or as a risk itself, just a list of readings, material that you recommend. We're going to list it as show notes at our episodes. And then post it there as well. So that's what we're going to do for our readers. You're going to get that for sure. Once again, thank you so much for sharing your insight and knowledge with us and experience. And hopefully we have created more awareness to our listeners, I would say.
Yeah, I'm glad to be spreading the gospel of insider threats. Thank you for allowing me to do so.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. I'll say a lot of information to digest, Jeroen. It's insider threat, but a lot of content. So I'm actually wondering, Jeroen, how are you going to look differently at your colleagues now? Because we're talking about insider threat. Like, are you going to see them as a threat or an asset? And what are your key takeaways on the topic today?
I think both, to be honest. One of my key takeaways for today was that security you should place security in the context of your business. We talked about it before, you and I, but also like the developments that are there within the company. Are there layoffs? Is there inflation going on in the country? It changes the motivation and it changes the threat actor, the insider threat. It has an impact on its motivation to engage or not. So I really, to me, it was an acknowledgement that your security program should adapt to those kind of influences. and that you should, get your basics right, of course, and that you should heavily invest in security culture so that people report stuff to you. I think that's one of my key takeaways, that is a very important step. Invest in security culture, in training and awareness programs. Also take care of your people, have empathy, but also understand what they are going through in life or working for the company that you're working for, that aftercare that Sunette was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I will definitely include in my assume breach principles that are often a cornerstone of my security program, include insider threat. You should assume that there is one person who will engage at some point due to circumstances and become a threat.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. What I liked about the whole idea of setting up such a program is, one, the threat is real, right? So we cannot ignore it. This really speaks to what you're saying, incorporate it into your security program. If nobody else is doing it, please do that as a CISO.
Yeah.
But what I will definitely also take away from the program is that it is it's a program that leverages other functions and other programs as well, right? If you're going to try to build it up from scratch without not talking to other functions, what is the compliance department, what is the risk department, what is the security department, even HR, probably you're going to fail.
Yeah.
So it is so key. If you're going to set up such a program and do something with insider threat, make sure that that you collaborate. It's not an ivory tower thing. So for me, that's one key takeaway. The other key takeaway, which I really liked, is that also with insider threat, you have to get the basics right.
Yes.
That's what, because if you're not going to get the basics right, you're going to get a lot of firefighting happening. And then probably you're going to get overwhelmed with all these sort of alerts, incidents that you have to follow up, showing afterwards that probably it was not that bad what happened.
Yeah.
So I think getting the basic right is extremely important. And I am really excited about what AI will do over here, the predictive analytics part. I think that will make our life easier. In general, for information security, I think AI will play a big role, of course, an uplift in solving the issues. But especially for insider threat, I'm quite confident and positive that AI will ensure for more adoption of CISOs or organization adopting insider threat programs, because they know they have more visibility, and it's not, oh my God, I'm just carrying water to the sea. It's not going to happen. I'm not going to solve it. They'll have more precise technologies and ways of pinpointing probably of risk areas.
Yeah.
With that, we're going to close the episode. So thank you so much for joining us today on the Reinvent Security podcast. We appreciate your time to tune in and explore the world of information security with Jeroen and me. In case that you have missed any details or you want to deeper dive into the resources we've discussed, make sure you check the show notes. There you'll find links to our social media channels. All our resources that were mentioned or we have received from the guests will be shared during the episode as show notes. And we're also looking for your input. If you have any specific question that you want to get answered, or you have any dream guests you love to see on the show for future episodes, shoot us a message on LinkedIn. Your suggestion, I can promise you, your suggestion will fuel our curiosity, so we'll act on it. Don't forget to subscribe on the Security Reinvent podcast on your favorite podcast player, but also on LinkedIn. Your ongoing, efforts means everything to us. We will not be as effective as producing new episodes if we don't have followers. So having followers and people showing excitement is very important to us to continue with this sort of work. We'll be back next month with another episode. Until then, take care, stay curious, and we're looking forward to have you again with us. Cheers.
Yeah, bye-bye.